A good historical coincidence is not just two things happened. It's when timing, place, people, and consequence all collide in a way that changes how you remember the event. Today, we're going through 101 of those cases from world history with enough context to separate the eerie from the exaggerated. 1. In 1898, Morgan Robertson wrote about a giant, unsinkable ship called the Titan that hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks with too few lifeboats. 14 years later, Titanic did almost the same thing. Not prediction, not magic, just history stealing the draft and refusing notes. 2. Edgar Allan Poe once wrote a shipwreck story where starving survivors kill and eat a sailor named Richard Parker. Decades later, the real yacht Mignonette sank, and desperate survivors killed a cabin boy named Richard Parker. That is not just dark. That is put the book down and leave the room dark. 3. Mark Twain was born in 1835, the same year Halley's Comet passed Earth, and he joked that he came in with the comet and would go out with it. Then he died in 1910, right as the comet returned. The man did not just write punchlines. Apparently, he scheduled one for the sky. 4. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. 5 years later, James Monroe also died on July 4th. 3 early presidents, 1 national birthday. At some point, the calendar stops looking random and starts looking smug. 5. Franz Ferdinand survived the first assassination attempt in Sarajevo. Then his driver took a wrong turn and stopped near Gavrilo Princip, the assassin who had missed his chance. 1 confused route, 1 loaded pistol, and suddenly World War I gets its opening scene. Worst navigation error in history? Strong contender. 6. World War I began after Franz Ferdinand was assassinated on June 28, 1914. The Treaty of Versailles, the peace deal meant to close that war, was signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years later. Even the paperwork came back to the crime scene wearing a suit. 7. Wilmer McLean moved his family to escape the American Civil War after one of the first major battles happened near his property. Then Robert E. Lee surrendered in McLean's own parlor at Appomattox. This poor man tried to leave the war, and the war basically said, "Nice house, we'll finish here." 8. Robert Todd Lincoln had an awful habit of being close to presidential assassinations. He was at his father's deathbed, was present when Garfield was shot, and was in Buffalo when McKinley was attacked. After the 3rd time, even a calm person would start declining presidential invitations. 9. Before Abraham Lincoln was murdered by John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's son Robert was reportedly saved from a train platform accident by Edwin Booth, John's famous actor brother. One Booth saved a Lincoln. Another Booth killed a Lincoln. History did not write irony here. It carved it with a knife. 10. The Hoover Dam's first recorded construction death was surveyor J.G. Tierney, who drowned in the Colorado River. Years later, the final official fatality was his son, Patrick Tierney. Same project, same family, same date in December. That detail turns a worksite record into a ghost story. 11. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on business when the first atomic bomb fell. Injured, he returned home to Nagasaki, then survived the second atomic bombing 3 days later. Japan later officially recognized him as a survivor of both. Some people beat odds. He walked through the worst odds twice. 12. Violet Jessup survived disaster on all 3 Olympic-class sister ships. She was aboard Olympic during its collision, escaped Titanic in 1912, and survived Britannic when it sank in 1916. At that point, the ocean was not testing her luck. It was losing an argument. 13. The traditionally identified first and last British soldiers killed in World War I are buried in the same cemetery near Mons, Belgium, with their graves facing each other. John Parr died in 1914. George Ellison died in 1918, just before the armistice. 4 years of slaughter, framed by 2 headstones. 14. In June 1941, Soviet researchers opened Tamerlane's tomb in Samarkand, despite local legends warning that disturbing him would bring disaster. Within days, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Was it a curse? No. Was the timing creepy enough to make everyone suddenly respect old warnings? Absolutely. 15. Napoleon invaded Russia on June 24, 1812. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. Both marched in during summer, both expected a faster victory, and both got swallowed by distance, winter, and resistance. History handed out the same exam twice, and the second guy still failed. 16. The Western Roman Empire's last emperor was Romulus Augustus. Romulus was Rome's legendary founder, and Augustus was Rome's first emperor. So the final boy emperor carried the names of both the beginning and the peak. That is not a name. That is a closing credit. 17. Constantinople was reshaped into an imperial capital by Constantine the Great. More than 1,000 years later, when the city fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the last Byzantine emperor was Constantine XI. The city opened and closed its Roman chapter under the same name. Subtle? Not even close. Not. 18. November 9th is so packed in German history that it became known as a Day of Fate. The Republic was proclaimed in 1918. Hitler's beer hall putsch happened in 1923, Kristallnacht erupted in 1938, and the Berlin Wall opened in 1989. One date kept changing costumes and returning to the stage. 19. Kublai Khan tried to invade Japan twice, in 1274 and 1281. Both times, huge storms wrecked the Mongol fleets and helped save Japan. The Japanese later called them divine winds. One typhoon is luck. Two typhoons start looking like the weather joined the defense ministry. 20. Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin were born on the exact same day, February 12, 1809. One reshaped politics and slavery in America. The other reshaped how humans understood life itself. Same birthday, two completely different revolutions. The 19th century really dropped a double album that day. 21. On February 14, 1876, Alexander Graham Bell's lawyer filed a telephone patent application, while Elisha Gray's lawyer filed a caveat for a similar voice transmission idea the very same day. Bell got the patent. Gray got the historical headache. The future of communication came down to paperwork timing. Brutal. 22. Charles Darwin sat on his theory of natural selection for years, polishing it like a man afraid to drop a bomb in a library. Then Alfred Russel Wallace independently sent him a similar idea from across the world. Suddenly, evolution had two messengers, and Darwin had one very loud reason to publish. 23. Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz both developed calculus independently in the 17th century, giving humanity one of its most powerful mathematical tools. Naturally, their followers turned it into a bitter credit war. Because even genius apparently needs a custody battle. 24. The Romanov dynasty began in 1613 with Michael Romanov. 300 years later, Nicholas II abdicated and named his brother Michael as successor, but Michael refused the throne. The dynasty practically began with Michael and ended with Michael. Russia does not do poetic collapse halfway. 25. In 1913, Vienna had Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Leon Trotsky, Josip Broz Tito, and Sigmund Freud in the city around the same period. Future dictators, revolutionaries, and the father of psychoanalysis were all walking the same streets. Imagine passing them at a cafe and thinking, nice quiet city. So far, you can already see the pattern. The strongest coincidences are not just weird dates. They usually connect timing with consequence. A wrong turn, a delayed message, a shared location, a document filed on the same day. That is where coincidence stops being trivia and starts becoming history. 26. Erwin Rommel helped build Germany's defenses in Normandy, then left for Germany because the weather looked too bad for an invasion and his wife's birthday was coming. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed anyway. The biggest amphibious assault in history showed up while the Desert Fox was off the board. 27. At Midway, Japanese carriers were caught at the worst possible moment. Planes half rearmed, fuel lines exposed, decks crowded, orders changing by the minute. Then American dive bombers arrived. A few minutes of awful timing helped turn the Pacific War on its head. 28. Kokura was supposed to receive the second atomic bomb. On August 9, 1945, clouds and smoke covered the target, so the bomber moved on to Nagasaki. That is why Kokura's luck became a phrase in Japan. One city survived because the sky, for once, refused to be clear. 29. The Wilhelm Gustloff sank on January 30, 1945, with thousands of refugees and military personnel aboard. That date was already poisoned. It was the 50th birthday of Wilhelm Gustloff, the Nazi figure the ship was named after, and the anniversary of Hitler taking power. A symbol sank on its own loaded date. 30. Richard III spent centuries remembered as England's crooked villain king. Then, in 2012, archaeologists found his skeleton under a parking lot in Leicester. And yes, the spine really was curved. Shakespeare may have been brutal, but the parking lot still had evidence. 31. Apollo 13 launched at 1:13 p.m. Central Time. 2 days later, on April 13th, an oxygen tank exploded and turned a moon landing into a survival puzzle. The crew made it home, but even serious engineers had to look at the number 13 and quietly admit, okay, that's a little rude. 32. Shackleton's Endurance was crushed by Antarctic ice in 1915 and vanished under the sea. In 2022, explorers found the wreck on March 5th, exactly 100 years after Shackleton was buried in South Georgia. The ship waited in the dark like it had kept one final appointment with its captain. 33. In 1822, Champollion cracked the key to reading Egyptian hieroglyphs. Exactly 100 years later, Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb. First, the world learned how to read ancient Egypt. Then, Egypt handed over one of its most famous locked rooms. 34. Julius Caesar was murdered in the Curia of Pompeii, part of the complex built by the rival he had defeated. Ancient tradition even places him near Pompey's statue. Imagine winning the Civil War, taking Rome, and then dying under the shadow of the guy you beat. Rome invented cinematic revenge. 35. People often say Shakespeare and Cervantes died on the same date, April 23, 1616. The truth is messier. England and Spain used different calendars, and Cervantes was buried that day after dying earlier. So even this famous literary coincidence needs an editor. Of course it does. 36. On November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy, C.S. Lewis, and Aldous Huxley all died. A president, the creator of Narnia, and the author of Brave New World left on the same day. Kennedy's assassination swallowed the headlines, so the other two exits almost disappeared in the historical smoke. 37. Adolf Hitler and Charlie Chaplin were born 4 days apart in April 1889 and became linked by that tiny toothbrush mustache. One used power to terrorize the world. The other used comedy to make that image look pathetic in The Great Dictator. Same facial hair. Opposite moral universe. 38. Napoleon Bonaparte and the Duke of Wellington were both born in 1769. One rose from Corsica, the other from the Anglo-Irish elite, and their careers finally collided at Waterloo. Same birth year, two military machines, one brutal final exam. Wellington passed. Napoleon got sent to a rock. 39. Harry Houdini spent his life escaping chains, cages, locked boxes, water tanks, and every dramatic death trap show business could sell tickets for. Then he died on October 31st, 1926. Halloween. The world's most famous escape artist leaving on the spookiest day of the year feels almost illegally perfect. 40. The Great Fire of London began in 1666 at a bakery on Pudding Lane. Later tradition marked its stopping point near Pie Corner. So one of history's most famous city fires became tied to place names that sound like dessert. London burned, and somehow the map told a joke. 41. The Battle of New Orleans was fought on January 8, 1815, after Britain and America had already signed the Treaty of Ghent. The news just had not crossed the Atlantic yet. Men fought and died because information moved slower than ships. That is a rough way to lose to bad delivery speed. 42. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened in 1830 as a glowing symbol of the industrial future. During the ceremony, politician William Huskisson was struck by Stephenson's rocket, and became the world's first widely reported railway passenger fatality. The future arrived, then immediately ran someone over. 43. Alfred Nobel once read an obituary meant for him after a newspaper confused him with his dead brother. It described him as a merchant of death because of dynamite. Seeing your legacy roasted before you are even dead? That is one nasty preview screen, and it helped push him toward the Nobel Prizes. 44. Two Bell Labs scientists kept hearing a stubborn hiss in their antenna and blamed equipment, interference, even pigeon mess. Nearby, Princeton researchers were preparing to search for radiation left from the Big Bang. The hiss was exactly that. The universe called and the wrong office picked up. 45. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein during the miserable summer of 1816, when storms trapped writers indoors near Lake Geneva. That weather was partly caused by Mount Tambora's eruption in Indonesia. A volcano darkened the sky, ruined the vacation, and accidentally helped create modern science fiction. 46. Before D-Day, several secret Allied code words appeared as answers in Daily Telegraph crosswords, including Utah, Omaha, Overlord, Mulberry, and Neptune. British intelligence investigated because that is not a cute puzzle anymore. It was treated as coincidence, but wow, what a stressful one. 47. Tokyo was chosen for the 1940 Olympics, but war ripped those games away. Decades later, Tokyo prepared for 2020, and a global pandemic pushed the Olympics into 2021. Same city, two different global crises, two Olympic disruptions. Tokyo did not just host history, it had to wrestle it twice. 48. In 1588, storms helped scatter the Spanish Armada after England's navy had already battered it. A century later, favorable winds helped William of Orange sail to England in the Glorious Revolution. English Protestants called it Providence. Apparently, even the weather had opinions. 49. On April 4, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his Riverside speech against the Vietnam War. Exactly 1 year later, on April 4, 1968, he was assassinated in Memphis. One date holds his warning about violence and the violence that took him. No punchline belongs here. 50. From 1840 through 1960, every United States president elected in a year, ending in 0, died in office. Harrison, Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, Harding, Franklin Roosevelt, and Kennedy. Then Reagan, elected in 1980, survived being shot. The so-called curse finally blinked. 51. On October 8, 1871, Chicago burned into American legend. That same night, the Peshtigo fire in Wisconsin killed far more people and became the deadliest wildfire in United States history. One fire became famous. The deadlier one got buried under the bigger city's smoke. 52. During World War I, the German ship Cap Trafalgar disguised itself to look like the British liner Carmania. Then it accidentally met the real Carmania in the Atlantic. Imagine showing up to a costume party dressed as someone, and that exact person is standing there with cannons. 53. Germany signed the 1918 armistice in a railway carriage at Compiègne. In 1940, Hitler forced France to sign its surrender in the same carriage, at the same spot. That was not diplomacy. That was revenge staged like a theater production, with a train car as the prop. 54. Charles Dickens survived the Staplehurst rail crash on June 9, 1865, after his train derailed and people died around him. The trauma never really left him. Then, exactly 5 years later, on June 9, 1870, Dickens died. The calendar did not just remember, it came back. 55. Sergei Prokofiev died on March 5, 1953, the same day as Joseph Stalin. In Moscow, Stalin's death swallowed the flowers, the headlines, even the grief. One of Russia's greatest composers left almost silently because the dictator got the entire room, even in death. 56. On February 14, 1884, Theodore Roosevelt lost both his mother and his young wife in the same house, on the same day. His wife had given birth 2 days earlier. He marked the diary page with a black X and wrote that the light had gone out of his life. History rarely punches that cleanly. 57. On March 12, 1951, two unrelated comic strips called Dennis the Menace debuted on opposite sides of the Atlantic. Different creators, different countries, same title, same day. Apparently, Childhood Chaos filed duplicate paperwork, and nobody noticed until both kids were already causing trouble. 58. Many ancient timelines place Hannibal and Scipio Africanus dying in the same year, 183 BC. One was Carthage's nightmare genius, the other Rome's man who beat him at Zama. After decades of rivalry, history let them exit almost together, like the final scene of an ancient war epic. 59. On July 14, 1789, while revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, King Louis XVI wrote one word in his diary: nothing. He meant he caught nothing while hunting. Still, the old regime was cracking open in Paris, and the king's personal review of the day was basically, slow afternoon. 60. Spain's 1492 was not just Columbus sailing west. Granada fell, ending Muslim rule in Iberia. The Alhambra decree ordered Jews to leave or convert. Then Columbus crossed the Atlantic. 1 year closed one world, expelled another, and opened a brutal new age overseas. 61. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States while France began tearing down its monarchy. One revolution was trying to build a republic with laws and speeches. The other was about to get very sharp, very fast. Same year, wildly different instructions. 62. The Eiffel Tower was completed in 1889. That same year in Kyoto, Nintendo began making Hanafuda playing cards. Paris got an Iron Giant. Japan got a card company that would one day create Mario. Same year, two icons were born, one with rivets, one with future plumbers. 63. The Dead Sea Scrolls were first discovered in 1947, the same year the United Nations voted on a partition plan for Palestine. Ancient texts emerged from desert caves while the region's modern political future was being redrawn. The past and present showed up at the same meeting. 64. While the Great Pyramid already stood in Egypt, the last woolly mammoths still survived on Wrangel Island in the Arctic. Your brain wants pyramids and mammoths in separate folders. Too bad. For a while, ancient engineers and shaggy Ice Age giants shared the same planet. 65. Napoleon crowned himself emperor on December 2nd, 1804. Exactly 1 year later, on December 2nd, 1805, he won Austerlitz, arguably his greatest battlefield masterpiece. Most leaders celebrate anniversaries with speeches. Napoleon celebrated with 3 emperors and a military beatdown. 66. In 1241, Mongol armies had smashed into Europe and looked almost impossible to stop. Then Great Khan Ogadai died, and succession politics helped pull the campaign away. Europe did not get saved by a magical wall or a genius plan. It may have been saved by a funeral. 67. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Charlemagne was crowned emperor in Rome. On Christmas Day in 1066, William the Conqueror was crowned King of England. 2 empire-shaping coronations, same holiday, 2.5 centuries apart. Christmas apparently had a side hustle in regime change. 68. In 1521, Magellan was killed in the Philippines during the expedition that would complete the first circumnavigation. That same year, Tenochtitlan fell to Cortés and his indigenous allies. One world was being mapped by sea, while another was being shattered on land. 69. Alexander Fleming returned from vacation in 1928 and found mold contaminating a petri dish. Most people would have thrown it away. He noticed bacteria dying around it. A messy lab accident became penicillin. Somewhere, a clean desk enthusiast lost an argument with history. 70. Henri Becquerel was studying uranium salts when cloudy weather ruined his sunlight experiment. But the photographic plates fogged anyway, revealing invisible radiation from uranium itself. Bad weather helped unlock radioactivity. Even the clouds accidentally joined the physics department. 71. Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was declared safe and effective on April 12, 1955. That was exactly 10 years after Franklin Roosevelt died, the president whose own paralysis made polio a national obsession. Medicine picked a date with almost unbearable historical timing. 72. Stephen Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, exactly 300 years after Galileo died. Then Hawking died on March 14, 2018, Einstein's birthday and Pi Day. For a scientist who spent his life studying time and the universe, his dates were almost annoyingly perfect. 73. In 1903, the New York Times suggested practical flying machines might take millions of years to develop. Weeks later, the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk. Imagine publishing "Not anytime soon," and history immediately rolls onto the runway just to embarrass you. 74. In July 1946, a French designer introduced the bikini just days after nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. He named the swimsuit after the blast site because he wanted an explosive reaction. Humanity entered the atomic age and somehow turned it into beachwear branding. Insane, but effective. 75. In 1869, the Suez Canal opened between the Mediterranean and Red Seas, while the United States completed its first transcontinental railroad. One shortcut sliced through continents by water, the other stitched a continent by rail. Same year, the planet suddenly felt smaller and way more expensive. 76. World War II opened on September 1, 1939, with Germany invading Poland, and formally closed on September 2, 1945, with Japan signing surrender aboard Missouri. 6 years and 1 day. Not neat, not pretty. Just the calendar doing something weirdly tidy with a global disaster. 77. Pearl Harbor began America's Pacific War with Arizona burning in the harbor. 4 years later, Japan surrendered aboard Missouri. Today, Missouri sits in Pearl Harbor near Arizona, like the Navy parked the ending beside the beginning and said, "Yes, everyone will understand the symbolism." 78. Apollo 11 landed on the moon on July 20, 1969. Exactly 7 years later, Viking 1 landed on Mars on July 20, 1976. Same date, different world. In 7 years, humanity went from footprints on the moon to a machine sitting on Mars. That date really earned its place in space history. 79. Pope John Paul II was shot on May 13, 1981, the anniversary of the first reported Fatima apparition. He survived and later tied his survival to Mary of Fatima. Modern TV news suddenly had medieval-level symbolism walking through St. Peter's Square in white robes. 80. Pripyat's amusement park was supposed to open on May 1, 1986, for Soviet May Day celebrations. Chernobyl exploded on April 26, just days before. The Ferris wheel never got its happy first crowd. Instead, it became the dead symbol of a city everyone had to leave. 81. In 1770, celebrations for the future Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette turned deadly in Place Louis XV after fireworks caused panic. Years later, that same square, renamed Place de la Révolution, saw both of them executed. Their marriage party and their deaths shared the stage. 82. Philip Hamilton died after a duel near Weehawken in 1801. 3 years later, his father Alexander crossed the Hudson for his own duel with Aaron Burr near that same ground. Same family, same poisonous honor code, same river trip. Pride should have come with a Surgeon General's warning. 83. Teresa of Avila died during the 1582 calendar switch, when Catholic Europe jumped from October 4 straight to October 15th. Her death landed in a strange crack in time, where 10 dates simply vanished overnight. Most saints get a feast day. She got swallowed by a calendar update. 84. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln authorized the creation of the Secret Service. That same night, he was shot at Ford's Theater. The bitter twist is that the agency was created to fight counterfeit money, not guard presidents. The protection story came too late. 85. James Dean filmed a road safety spot shortly before his 1955 crash and warned drivers to take it easy because the life they saved might be his. Days later, he died behind the wheel of his Porsche. That is the kind of line a screenwriter would cut for being too obvious. 86. Jonathan Swift wrote about Mars having 2 tiny moons in Gulliver's Travels in 1726. long before astronomers found Phobos and Deimos in 1877. He was joking through fictional astronomers. The universe apparently read the satire and quietly said, "Actually, yes. Keep going." 87. In 1215, King John sealed Magna Carta in England, putting royal power on a leash, at least on paper. That same year, Genghis Khan's armies captured Zhengdu, the city we now call Beijing. One ruler was being limited by law. Another was rewriting the map with horsemen. Fast. 88. Around 1455, Gutenberg's Bible showed Europe what movable type could do. That same year, England's Wars of the Roses began. So while one machine started spreading books faster than ever, noble families were busy turning inheritance drama into a national bloodbath with better banners. 89. In 1776, Americans declared independence from Britain. That same year, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. One text attacked political control, the other changed how people talked about markets. Freedom got two very different manuals, and neither one was light reading. 90. In 1815, Mount Tambora blew so much debris into the sky that it helped wreck weather around the world. Weeks later, rain helped turn Waterloo into a muddy nightmare for Napoleon. The volcano did not defeat him by itself, but the planet absolutely made his comeback uglier. 91. In 1848, revolutions broke out across Europe as crowds demanded rights, constitutions, and governments that listened for once. That same year, Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto. The streets were already tense. Then history got a little book with a very long fuse. 92. In 1877, Japan's Satsuma Rebellion ended, crushing the last major samurai uprising. That same year, Edison introduced the phonograph, letting voices be recorded and played back. One old warrior class faded out while human sound learned how to haunt rooms after the speaker was gone. 93. In 1917, the United States entered World War I while Russia collapsed into revolution. One future superpower stepped onto the global stage. Another was being born in riots, breadlines, and gunfire. Same year, the 20th century loaded two giant machines and forgot the brakes. 94. In 1949, NATO was founded, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb, and Mao proclaimed the People's Republic of China. That is a ridiculous amount of Cold War architecture for 1 year. The world did not slowly enter a new era. It got shoved through the door. 95. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. That same year, Berlin built a wall through the middle of the city. Humanity looked down at Earth from orbit, then went home and split neighborhoods with concrete. We reached the stars and still could not handle each other. 96. In 1969, humans landed on the moon. Woodstock became a muddy cultural legend, and ARPANET sent its first computer message. Space travel, counterculture, and the baby version of the internet all showed up in 1 year. The future arrived messy, loud, and slightly confused. 97. In 1989, the Berlin Wall opened and Eastern Europe started breaking out of the Soviet grip. That same year, China crushed the Tiananmen Square protests. Two crowds demanded change. One wall cracked open. One square was silenced. Same year, opposite answers, zero easy moral comfort. 98. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. That same year, the World Wide Web began opening beyond its early research circle. One system built on secrecy and control fell apart, while a new way to share information started spreading. The old world lost its grip right as the new one plugged in. 99. On August 28, 2008, Barack Obama accepted the Democratic nomination exactly 45 years after Martin Luther King Jr. gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. Same date, same country, different stage. History did not finish the promise that night, but it definitely tapped the microphone. 100. In 1953, Watson and Crick published the double helix structure of DNA, and Hillary and Tenzing reached the top of Everest. Same year, humans looked inside life's instruction manual and stood on Earth's highest point. Biology went deep. Mountaineers went up. Both found a summit. 101. In 1543, Copernicus published the book that moved Earth away from the center of the universe, while Vesalius published the anatomy book that rebuilt the human body from direct observation. Same year, two old maps got torn up, one of the heavens, one of ourselves. Now I want a real argument in the comments. Which coincidence was historically strongest, not just the creepiest? Drop the number and explain why. If someone picks a weak one, challenge them. Like the video if the research earned it, and subscribe if you want history explained without turning it into homework.